So I want to talk about the supply and demand of researchers. I think this is a really interesting topic that, this is based on just sort of personal experience of what's actually going on. Because I think that the story is that there's always an insatiable demand for researchers, but this is such a macro silly thing to focus on. This is policymakers and sort of government entities that really do not know what they're actually talking about. And they really completely miss the mark with understanding what actually is a supply and demand. This is what happens, right? So within a particular domain, there's usually the demand for a certain thing, right? And that might be driven by a government mandate that they might want to look at innovation, for example, or they might want to look at entrepreneurship. And they maybe they give some funding to a university to look at a specific area. And the funding will actually be pretty small compared to what is actually required, right? But they'll think it's a relatively large amount. But what they completely underestimate, and they have this sort of logic that there is this, that you simply just have to fund something and then you'll get a result from it. Inevitably, it almost works out that they don't get the results that they expected. That's kind of normal. In fact, I would say that is probably 80%. If you look at, I want you to sort of think about drug discovery, right? So drug discovery is a good analogy. We know that I think it's around 90% of the drugs that ever start actually result in null results. And so the expectation is actually that you fund money and you're going to get some results from that. That is the traditional business funding model that's being applied to research and development. And inevitably, 9 out of 10 of those funding, the funding of research results in failure. And inevitably, people get upset and all that kind of stuff. And then on the supply side, what people forget about, and this is interesting for me because I sort of see this, right? So I think I'm the only person that's studying this particular domain because at my institution, within a narrow geographic region, I probably am the only person that's studying one particular thing. But the scientific community, the research community, is actually quite global. In fact, it is global. It's people from all over the world. And if there's this one little interesting insight that you might see, means that there's probably another 100, 200 more people that have seen this particular insight. It's probably actually much larger than that, and they're pursuing this as well from different angles. And so what ends up happening is when there might be a call for something and you realize that there's actually a lot of people doing the same thing within a particular domain from all over the world. They're just dispersed. They're just all over the place. And so there's actually a lot of supply for very little demand often, right? And so the positions, the way that it's structured is that there's a bit of a mismatch between supply and demand, right? So there's too much supply because, ideas, they're not hard to come up with in a sense of, the traditional way, but generally sort of things that you have thought about, other people have thought about as well, right? We're not so different, you and I. And because of that, there's a great deal of supply for different positions, different research funds. And then on the other side, we've got policymakers and government entities and decision makers that are super skeptical about the outcomes that actually get produced because, frankly, that is the reality of doing research and development. And most of it actually is results and failed results. And here's the thing that's even more challenging with it is that the failed results are not necessarily just because of the character of the individual, but it's due to many different factors that are hard to put your fingers on, right? And so inevitably, in the long run, in that particular area, there's usually, so let's say a new hot area comes up and people are really interested in it. So all of a sudden there's a great deal of supply for this particular thing. And then there's some demand to investigate it, to discover it, right? So right now, a hot thing within our research area is like platform research. So AI is another thing that's just really exploded, or it's going to probably, we're just at the beginning of sort of an explosion of investigating that. And so it's this hot little area. People get super excited about it and everybody rushes to investigate that. And we find out that it's difficult to study it. And inevitably, the research funds die out. And so there's all these boom busts that happen. It's not very stable in terms of research ideas. People think it's super stable, but it's not. And in fact, the ideas that are typically very stable, good morning, are typically tend to be very, very theoretical, because you're investigating something that is very generalizable. That's all theory means, is it's very generalizable. And people actually don't like funding that because it's not the hot thing, that's not the interesting thing, or people get bored of that particular thing because it's been done before, many times that I hear that all the time. It's been done before. And you have this sort of boom bust market that happens, this sort of rush of people from around the world investigating something, and then it dissipates. You saw this during COVID, for example. This was a big sort of rush, and people were really excited about it. And now, like, if you tried to publish it, you probably wouldn't get it published because it's kind of boring or past it. So what is it that we actually do? How do we actually deal with this? In my view, I think we have to sort of change ourselves in terms of researchers, and what we're focused on is not necessarily focus on the things that are like cultural moments where there's a great deal of supply or a great deal of demand for that particular thing, but also not doing something that is so theoretical that it gets discounted all the time. And so you have to find that sweet spot, and that's where it's really difficult to often find that sweet spot that is both theoretical and sort of relevant at a given moment in time. And so we struggle with positioning, and that's called what is called positioning what you're looking at. And the positioning is very, very challenging. And people will tell you, I've heard a lot of people say that they're good at positioning. That's just simply not true. You can't be good at that because you got to see what the market does, and you got to see how the market reacts. So it's really thinking about, not only thinking about what is going on and how the market actually reacts to what you're doing, but as well being very adaptable to what is going on within the market. So, long story short, the supply and demand of research and research careers is a muddy mess, and there's not really a supply and demand as one would think, that there's this neat sort of lineup of the X's between the supply and demand curve. It's more of a giant mess where nobody really knows what they're doing. People are trying to grapple at something, and then there's usually very hot moments where people rush towards something. And then we've got a bunch of skeptical research funders and government entities and decision makers that just really don't get it. They're really out. They're very much out of reality. And, here's the thing that's interesting is that usually the people that are part of the government funding entities that are directly related, they usually understand the nuances of this, but then there's levels of people where they have to get money to do that kind of stuff, and it's the higher level individuals that completely don't understand, because the market is usually not full of people that have done research or understand research careers. There's very few people that are in the real world that understand what research is about. So that's the predicament. How do we change this, right? So first of all, focus on things that you just find naturally interesting, right? And that sort of bridge in listening to the market as well. The other thing I think we can really change the market is by getting more people in industry, in policy positions that have actually done research and that understand that things are not as clear cut as one would think. And I think we need to get far more people doing that. I think there should be a practical push towards getting people that understand research and development, that have done research before, into policy. That is a hard thing to do, and that is something that's going to take a long time, but I think we need to really start shifting this and getting more people into the practical realm. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.